Hi everybody, I'm glad you're here. Very, very, very glad for every one of you. I want to remind everybody of the importance of being together again in person. And there could have been a few more persons here. That would be nice too. But I think these days, after what we've all gone through, we're grateful for every live body in front of us. And how many of you have I said to this evening, oh, you know, I see you beyond the little square that I've grown accustomed to seeing you. And it's so nice to see the rest of you as well. We know the advantages too. I mean, the opportunity to avoid some long and boring meetings where you can't escape to your emails and you're forced to eat cold beretzkas and pretzels and drink imitation cola from a plastic cup. Those are really bad meetings, and none of us misses those. But I want to tell you what happened to me personally after doing 2 online interviews at the beginning of the pandemic. So the first one was for the Mishkenot Writers Festival in Jerusalem, and I'd had the pleasure of taking part in those events for years, and I was due to interview 2 people, Mati Friedman and Ayelet Sabari, who is on her way in now. This was basically about the first Writers' Festival that went online. It was in May of 2020. So it was when people were still trying to figure out what this whole pandemic thing was. And Mishkenot decided to do the event online, fully online. And so it was a big experiment. And afterwards, we were asked what we thought about it, the people who had been, doing the event. And I remember Ayelet saying, I loved it. I could do this with my daughter sleeping in the next room and wearing my pajama bottoms. That was her, initial reaction. And my reaction was, it was awful. It was awful. I said, there was no buildup. The wardrobe selection and the trip to Jerusalem and meeting the organizers and meeting the interviewers and meeting the other writers who were not part of the same panel, and the green room discussion and seeing the crowd filling up the hall and with their bodies and their excitement. And worst of all was that I couldn't see the reactions of the audience. And for me as an interviewer, that was always really important to see. Are they with me? Are they with the discussion that's going on stage? Are they enjoying themselves? Are they getting bored? Do they want this thing to move on quicker? Or should I linger on this particular issue because people are so excited and interested? And all that was missing. And it was so bizarre. I really had to make it up as I was going along, and that was hard. I would wonder, that lumpy man in the 3rd row who was, about to fall asleep and embarrass his wife and me, could I get him to stay awake? And now I didn't know. Of course, maybe this was one of the advantages of not having a live audience, is not having to worry about that guy. But also after the event, there were no audience members to run up and say, thank you. This was inspiring. This was engaging. This was entertaining. They've been moved. Tinka, I'm looking at you and I'm thinking about one of those events at Mishkenot, and that was when you and Randy decided to come and study at Bar Ilan. So those things, they haven't been happening. And also there were no alcoholic beverages and funny stories to share with the now relieved panelists whose job was done and could relax and spend time together. So all of that was missing. And the second interview that I couldn't help thinking about was one that I did with the writer Edgar Keret, the choreographer Inbal Pinto, and the New York Times columnist Caitlin Roper, whose job it is, she's the liaison between the New York Times and Hollywood, which one of my friends said is the greatest job ever created in the history of humanity. So she sells television and film ideas to Hollywood from stories that appear in the New York Times. And it was a fun interview, but I experienced the same deflation. And after that interview, I expressed that to the organizer, and he said, well, the room that we had this planned for held 200 people. And I said, yeah, I know. And he said, well, 4,000 attended the event live, and 17,000 people had seen it by the next day. So I get it. that was the big advantage, that this sort of thing could come to people who wouldn't normally have taken part. And that is an advantage. But I, unlike some of my writer colleagues, retreated into myself after that. I was missing too much the experience of the on-stage and live with an audience event. And I really respect those colleagues of mine who said, I'm gonna invent new ways of approaching people. I'm gonna put myself out there on Zoom. I'm going to get to them and give them access to me. And I went the opposite way. So I am especially grateful, again, for every person who is here and taking part, and may we have many, many more opportunities and events for this to happen. You are all indispensable. This evening, we are here to celebrate this annual event that we have, the conference and the memorial event for Shaindy Rudoff, whose mother, Hedda, is here from New York. Give a wave, Hedda. Thank you. It wouldn't be the conference without her. And we'll talk more about Hedda and Shaindy as the conference progresses. But meanwhile, the topic this year is life writing and the writing life. And as you know, we have a couple of days of events, and we have an incredible lineup of people with us, some of them from abroad and some from within Israel. So 2 of our 3 guests from overseas are here this evening. So one is Beth Fennelly, who's right down here and who's going to join me on stage pretty soon. And the other is Ariella Friedman. Where are you, Ariella? Yeah, thank you. And Kim Eklund from Canada will be joining us tomorrow. She couldn't be here this evening. For our locals, most of them are not here this evening, except we have Rana Werbin right down here, an Israeli writer who's going to be joining us here on stage soon. And the others you will meet in the coming days: Ayelet Sabari, Jane Medved, Yael Hakohen, and Joanna Chen. There were some fabulous student volunteers, and I'm reminding you that in future conferences, all of you students are invited and welcome to volunteer or be pressed into service, as it were. Michael Ben Chaim, Vivian Cohen-Lazarek, who's right here, Yoni Hamel Kosoy down here, and Sarah Sasson, who isn't here this evening. A special thank you to Chagit Solomon and Chelsea Mosery Birnbaum from the English Department office, who, above and beyond all the other things that they do in their abnormal work lives and in organizing a conference, which is no small feat, is I've never seen refreshments like this at a Bar Ilan event. So they are here for life, as far as I'm concerned. So again, I want to thank you all for being here, and I am going to turn over the floor briefly to Dr. Daniel Feldman, who's going to give a Dvar Torah, and then we are going to get to our interview. Daniel.
Okay, thank you, Evan, and welcome everyone. Yesterday we began to read, at least here in Israel, Sefer Bamidbar, the 4th book of the Torah. Bamidbar is translated in English as the book of Numbers, thanks to the 2 countings of the people taken at the start and at the end of the text. But the Hebrew word, the title Bamidbar, can be more faithfully and literally rendered as in the desert or in the wilderness. This is the Torah's wild book of the desert. True to its name, Bamidbar is indeed the most bewildering of the 5 books of Moses. It is a book that begins with a census and ends with a census tabulating nearly the identical sum total of the population, but which in the interim craftily substitutes each and every member of the population being counted. In the wild wastes of the desert, mirages, illusions, and confusions proliferate. Things are not quite what they seem to be. The wilderness of Bamidbar is a place meant to serve only as a brief interlude between the exodus from Egypt and deliverance to the promised land. But it comes to serve as the setting for an extended 40-year sojourn that is the backdrop for the vast majority of the words of the Torah, some 3.5 of the 5 books of Chumash. What is this formative and bewildering desert? As Aviva Zornberg writes in her commentary on Bamidbar, the wilderness evokes not only geographical terrain, but also an inner landscape, an inscape, as it were, a world of imaginative being. The wilderness is a place of imagination, an empty canvas on which we project sometimes great hope, at other times forlorn desolation, and which ultimately comes to be remembered with fond nostalgia. It is the place where the Torah, the Jewish people's national narrative, is authored, and it is the place where some of our most resonant images are forged. זכרתי לך חסד נעורייך, אהבת כלולתייך, לכתך אחרי במדבר בארץ לא זרועה. I counted to your favor the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride, how you followed me in the wilderness in a barren land. The Jewish sages have long noted the multitude of words written in and about the desert. They focus on this idea in a midrash from Shmot Rabbah that draws on the linguistic affinity between davar, word, and midbar, desert. Ein midbar ela dibur, she'emar u'midbarech naveh. Wilderness, midbar, is nothing but speech, dibur. As it is said in the Song of Songs, your lips are like a scarlet thread, your tongue, midbarech, lovely. The midbar is a place devoid of life, but full of words. It bespeaks or signifies the arduous journey from infantile silence, the inchoate cries of Egyptian bondage, to compelling narrative, artful verse, and an original story of self. We can deduce an important lesson from this midrash. The inner wilderness, the inscape of imagination, as Zornberg says, is where we all learn to write. Each of us here has sat before the bleak, empty stretch of a forbidding white sheet or screen, wondering, how will we make it home to a complete draft? Each of us has wondered, who will hear our voice in the vast stretches of the wilderness? But if we each inevitably struggle to write as individual voices in the wilderness, we would do well to recall that we are not alone on this journey. Despite the sensation that we write in isolation, the story of Bamidbar tells us otherwise. The midrash I quoted earlier continues, Amar Rabbi Yoshua, למה היה רודף למדבר לפי שראה ישראל נתעלו מן המדבר, שנאמר מי זאת עולה מן המדבר שהיה להם מן המדבר המן והסלב והבאר והמשכן והשכינה. Rabbi Joshua says, why did he pursue them into the wilderness? Because he foresaw that Israel would rise out of the wilderness, as it says in the Song of Songs. Who is this ascending from the wilderness? In the desert they had the man, the quail, the well, the mishkan, and the divine presence. Though taxing and intimidating, the midbar is a place of gifts, not least of them the presence of fellow travelers who envelop us with their camaraderie, both literal and literary. The notion that others have traveled and continue to travel the arduous path of the writer with us serves to remind, as Emily Dickinson writes in one of her poems, that there are others with thee in the desert, with thee in the thirst. As with Bnei Israel Bamidbar, like the Israelites in the wilderness, to be a writer is to pass through a bewildering space. But for those who seek to author their own tale, to sing their own lyric, to figure their own accounting of self, there is no other path but to traverse the daunting, bewildering space of our own minds. There is no shortcut, no more pleasant route. The journey takes as long as it must, because the wilderness, that may seem a morass of false starts and wrong turns, ends up being the only true path home to the promised land of our own words. Ein midbar el dibur. Nothing beside remains. The lone and level sands stretch far away. Enjoy the program.
I'm back. I wasn't supposed to be. As you see in your program, Professor Marcella Shulak should be sitting up here right now. Unfortunately, she fell ill. And it is doubly sad because she should be here, but also because she worked so hard for so many long months to pull this conference together, and she should be enjoying finally this day the fruits of her labor. So I'm very sorry. I will try to do my best to step into her shoes for this interview. It was very last minute, so if I make an absolute mess of this, I know that these two will carry on without me, and I'll just, over in the corner. But let's hope it goes okay. The way we're going to do this is I'm going to ask both Beth Ann and Rana to give a short reading, and then we'll sit and talk for a bit. They'll each give another short reading, and we'll talk a little more, okay? And I promise you, I always stay on time. We will finish, as promised, at 8 o'clock. So no need to get fidgety or worried. Does he know what time it is? Is he going to end on time? Am I going to miss my bus or my train? It'll all be fine, okay? So good. So, Beth Ann, you know what? Let me just do a proper introduction first, though. Yeah. So our two guests today, as you know, you have their biographies in the program, but I just want to call your attention now. So Beth Ann Fennelly is the Poet Laureate of Mississippi, and she teaches in the MFA program at the University of Mississippi. She's written 3 books of poetry, a book of nonfiction, a novel that she co-authored with her husband, and most recently a book of micro-memoirs. Oh, wow. There's a lot to talk about there already, isn't there? And she is going to be reading this evening from
Heating and Cooling.
Heating and Cooling, the newest book. That's fantastic. Okay, thank you. Beth Ann, we're so happy that you've come all the way from Mississippi to be here with us.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be here. It's my first trip to Israel, and I've been here 3 days, and already my clothes are tight. It's been unbelievable. And Evan, what you said about the food outside at the reception, I've never had such good reception food. Yeah, and I'm honored to be part of the Shaindy Rudoff series, and thank you, Hedda, for establishing this in memory of your daughter. That's very beautiful to me. Thank you, Evan, for pitch hitting with such grace at the last minute, and thank you all for being here. I've always wanted to come here, and it's just been such a thrill ever since I landed. I've experienced such hospitality and kindness, both from people who invited me into their home and just strangers who I stopped and asked for directions. So. It's been a thrill. I'm going to read you a little bit from my book, Heating and Cooling, 52 Micro-Memoirs. And if you're thinking you don't know what the term micro-memoir means, it's okay, because I think I made it up. But as Evan kindly mentioned, I had written poetry for a long time. My training was in poetry. And then I kind of accidentally wrote a novel with my husband. And before that, I'd written a book of essays about motherhood. And after I wrote that novel, which it took us 4 years to write, it was pretty high stakes. We had to do a lot of research, and we had to figure out how to write a novel collaboratively, and still like each other. So, there was a lot of pressure. Afterwards, I thought I would just write a novel by myself, but I didn't. I was writing all these weird thoughts, overheard conversations, crazy memories, and one day I went to my notebook and I thought, okay, I don't recognize what these are, but I'm having fun. And I came up with the term micro-memoir, so I decided just to be greedy and take what I love from the different genres. So what I love from poetry is its extreme compression and abbreviation. And what I love from fiction is creating a little tiny narrative. And what I love from nonfiction is truth-telling. So this is the first piece in the book, and my husband, his name is Tom Franklin, and he's a writer. He's home with our 3 kids, and so this one goes out to him. Married Love. In every book my husband's written, a character named Colin suffers a horrible death. This is because my boyfriend, before I met my husband, was named Colin. In addition to being named Colin, he was Scottish and an architect. So you understand my husband's feelings of inadequacy. My husband cannot build a tall building of many stories. He can only build a story and then push Colin out of it. Oh, you don't have to. So one of the fun things about this book was seeing how small I could go, just taking everything out that I possibly could. And I started writing a series of one-sentence micro-memoirs, and they were really fun to write, so I thought I'd share some of those with you. Mommy wants a glass of Chardonnay. If you collected all the drops of days I've spent singing row, row, row your boat to children fighting sleep, you'd have an ocean big enough to drown them many times over. This is also in the married love sequence. So what I ended up thinking about was maybe we don't have an ethos that appreciates the love of people who've been hanging out for a long time. You know, we have a lot of movies and books and TV and songs about first love or unrequited love, but that kind of day-to-day I thought would be fun to look at. So here's another one. This is Married Love 2. There will come a day, let it be many years from now, when our children realize no married couple ever needed to retreat at high noon behind a locked bedroom door to discuss taxes. Married Love 3. As we lower on to the December cold pleather seats of our used minivan, we knock hands, both of us reaching to turn on the other's seat warmer first. Aww. So I'll end my little section with 2, and 1 is just slightly longer, and 1 is 2 sentences long, and then we get to hear from Rana. So I'm originally from Chicago, although I've lived in Mississippi for 21 years. And when I moved to Mississippi, I met my husband in graduate school, first day of graduate school, and he was from the woods in Alabama, and his family hadn't gone to university, and they hadn't traveled, and he was really unlike anyone I'd ever met. And we fell in love, and I ended up also kind of falling in love with his parents. His dad was a mechanic until he passed a few years ago. I really loved him, and the book is dedicated to him. And this is about Tommy's dad, Gerald. Salvage. Tommy's parents wave from the front porch as our minivan pulls up. His dad smiles, and that's when I see he's missing about half of his teeth. Before retiring a few years back, Gerald was a mechanic. During high school, he'd apprenticed at his uncle's garage, then serviced Army vehicles while stationed in Germany, then returned home and kept fixing cars. Worked from can to can't, worked Saturdays, feeding himself into the maw of busted trucks in un-air-conditioned Alabama, feeding a wife and 3 kids. Eventually, he'd own his own shop, Franklin Automotive. In addition to repairs, he had a line on totals, wrecks the insurance company didn't consider worth fixing. Gerald considered otherwise. He'd buy 2 or 3 of the same model at salvage auction, then Frankenstein them together. Technically, he wasn't allowed to sell them, branded title and all that, but he figured there was no harm in it, as long as the customer knew. That man loved to negotiate, and he could sell an icebox to an Eskimo. Gerald's body, 82, is the one chassis he can't repair. Shingles, macular degeneration, hypertension, a spot on his kidneys that needs watching, pneumonia, asthma, steroids for the asthma. So many small parts failures. And now, the teeth. He stopped going to the dentist years ago. Finally had to get the rotten ones pulled. Gerald sighs as we lower ourselves onto the living room recliners. New teeth, he's been told, will set him back a pretty penny. How much, we ask. 16,000. He pauses. Wish I knew how much use I'd get out of him. How much longer I got here below, you reckon? He fiddles with his inhaler. How many meals I got left? Tommy, Tommy's mom, and me. What can we do but shrug? Don't need a full set, he says, addressing the ceiling, as if bargaining, as if God's scrapyard is lousy with spare teeth, all reasonable offers considered. This, coming from a man who worked 6 days a week for over 60 years. All's I need's enough to chew a steak. So that's Gerald. When I was younger, I thought I wanted to be a political writer, but I wasn't any good at it because as soon as I started expressing my opinion, and I don't know, I didn't allow for any mystery or something. I don't know. It just didn't work for me, but I think the politics are there despite myself, because really what that piece is also about for me is that the American healthcare can leave someone abandoned at their end of their life. No matter how hard they work, it can just leave you with nothing if you have health problems. So that rage transformed into that. So this is the last piece I'll read. That piece was called Salvage. This is called Addendum to Salvage. Won $1,000 in a literary contest for one of these essays. Bought my father-in-law a tooth.
Rana, I'm going to invite you to the podium now, please. Rana is something of a local celebrity, a writer, an editor, and translator, who's well known in the Tel Aviv literary scene and what lies beyond it. Her first book, Life is Good, has been translated by Maya Klein and Yalden Greenspan, and it introduces the genre of auto-reality, which we'll talk more about, certainly this evening. She's also had something of a career in acting, appearing in Munich and Shabbatot v'Chagim and Shemesh. So, but tonight, she's here as the writer, Rana Werbin.
Thank you. Hi. So yes, auto-reality is also a term that I coined, I think. Basically, it's the first book. I'm going to read from my two books. The first was written and published almost 13 years ago, and the second 2 years ago. Okay, I'll just read. So it's auto-reality, but really I could have called it an edited diary of 25 years of growing up. So this is from December 24th, 2002. Christmas. Not that it means anything to us Jews in the Holy Land, except for the embarrassment about ruining the holiday for the Christian people who hold Bethlehem sacred and now can't go in or out of it because of the blockade. And as usual, there's fear of war with Iraq that might come by the end of next month. But I'll keep dealing with my small inner world until I'm forced to stop. It's better to enjoy each moment of warmth and contentment and all the other small things that make up human happiness while you still can. It's been a month since I finished reading Primo Levi's If This Is a Man, but the impression it made is still strong. I'm also influenced by Samuel Richardson's Pamela, which makes me feel like writing everything all the time. Last night, Gidi and I went to visit a married friend of his who came from LA for vacation. His parents and his wife's parents were there. They all looked like brothers of beige. His little sister, I forget her name, joined us later. She's 19 and a basketball player. She bugged me a little at first because she got there while I was in the bathroom and took my place next to Gidi. She gave me my seat back when I returned, and then we spoke a little, and she was nice, so I stopped being annoyed. Once again, though, I saw how irritating older men are, generally speaking. They have old-fashioned views on women and no tact or gentlemanliness that could prevent them from speaking in a certain way while women are around. Israeli men of that generation lack manners and finesse. even if they're successful and bourgeois. The host, who seemed like a gentle and nice man, suggested this bright idea for financial profit: opening a combined daycare center, kindergarten, retirement home, and brothel. The logic behind it is that babies and old people eat the same food anyway, and the caretakers could pop out once in a while to receive clients. That way, the male managers could profit most from their investment. His daughter and I were furious. She got up after a minute or two and went into another room. I kept quiet. One of Giddy's ugly friends got excited about the idea. Giddy knows me well enough, so he remained silent. Why does this happen? Why would an older, seemingly gentle and nice enough man, who probably considers himself cultured and well-mannered, raise such a repulsive and disgusting idea that degrades and abuses women on principle? To say nothing of the cruel comparison between old people and babies. How will he feel when he's old? How can he humiliate so many groups of people in a single breath? I hope that he understood after the unpleasant silence and his daughter leaving the room the cruelty of his abusive thoughts. Before that, the father of the bride, who actually seemed like a rude man, and so I was expecting him to say the crudest things, spoke about how fun it was to shop at a certain supermarket chain, and one of the reasons he gave was that the hot female Russian cashiers. The ugly friend immediately chimed in, enthusiastically expressing his agreement. Giddy and I were silent again, and almost everyone else was too. The ugly guy was so gross, he'll grow up to be a repulsive man. I'm just sick of chauvinistic men of all ages, just sick of it. Why do I have to spend what was supposed to be a nice evening among parents and friends constantly hearing degrading things about women? Why this attack? If they can't change the way of thought in spite of global progress, they could at least refrain from talking about it in front of women out of some gentlemanly etiquette. We really were better off in the 19th century. Everything would be run by men just as it is now, but at least we could avoid the horrible experience of hearing their thoughts. Yet here we are, still not able to respond due to our own manners, which I'm not sure why we keep. And November 4th, 2007. It's the anniversary of Rabin's assassination today. Even I remember the date. Last night there was a big memorial at the square. Mom texted to ask if I went. I told her I was playing La Donna e Mobile on the piano. She asked, at the neighbors? I replied, no, at my place. I rented a piano. She probably felt weird that I didn't tell her about it beforehand because we were kind of fighting this week. But she was nice about it and said that I'm a talented child. Some rebel, almost 34 years old, and rents a piano without telling her parents. When I took Nina out for a walk last night, I saw the paper remains of someone's life strewn all over the sidewalk, probably someone old who died. There were letters from the HMO and old newspapers and even the cover of a book that this old person had written. Eventually you die and your entire life scatters on the sidewalk and ends up in the garbage. What's going to happen to the millions of words I've written all my life? I wouldn't want them to end up on the sidewalk. Everyone is posting everything online, but an obscure online domain is also a kind of a sidewalk. Nobody's gonna need me to learn about life in Israel at the beginning of the millennium. Everything is extremely well documented. If in the old days things were documented for eternity or for the sake of posterity, nowadays writing should only be intended for creating the now. That's how I live, in my own private written world. Every morning or evening I create this fabricated, narrated universe, processing my life into stories. I think about how I'm going to write these things even as they're happening. Then life starts to arrange itself according to the written pages. Events are emphasized or played down according to the way I set them up in words and narrative. Naturally, there are surprises, but they too find their place within the story eventually. It's a world in which mind and matter are almost the same. November 17th, 2007. That's the last one I will read. An 80-year-old sociologist wrote a book that was reviewed in Haaretz literary section today. He claims that the present generation has trouble making decisions because of the multitude of choices available and because of the influence of the internet and cellular technology. Everything's short, quick, accessible, and there's no sense of investing for the future. There are too many distractions, etc. He's wrong. It's not technology, but rather history that affects us in this manner. The stories we heard from previous generations have a much stronger influence than text messages do, at least here in Israel. When all our elders were uprooted from their homes and had to start over, in a place where constant tumult is a reasonable expectation, and no one knows if we'll end our lives where we began them, and everything is so unstable, with constant wars, attacks, death threats, and retaliations, how is it possible to maintain a solid private life? If anyway the world is constantly in flux, and everything disintegrates and reunites at least once in a lifetime, and we haven't even had 2 consecutive generations of stable peace, it must affect life choices more than any electronic gadget. There's no definite reward for being consistent, and we've learned that lesson from the very same sociologists' generation.
Well, I think you've given us, both of you have given us enough to talk about till this morning. Everybody ready to stay till tomorrow morning? Thank you, both of you. Those are 2 great readings, and I think it would be good to start with form, because both of you have said interesting things about form, and you're experimenting with form, working in different genres, combining genres, and each of you has coined a term. I feel so boring up here as a novelist. I mean, the people have been doing that for a long time, but you're creating your own genres. So could you talk a little bit more about, well, maybe Beth Ann, if you'll start with all these different genres that you've written in, and then eventually coming to writing your own genre, creating your own one.
Sure. Well, I only ever wanted to be a poet, and poetry is so hard and so unloved that I always thought it was all I would ever want to do and I should never stray from it, but I started cheating on poetry. I've always loved the sentence, loved novels in particularly, and I just found my lines were getting longer and longer, but in addition, they didn't feel like prose poems to me, and partially it has to do with, I think, poetry is more vertical, and prose is more horizontal. Like poetry is more metaphorical and makes leaps, and I think the sentence is more connected to time, and what came before and what came after, which is a way of saying plot. So I started just crushing on the sentence and writing the sentence, but I didn't want to call them prose poems because it's also important to me with the new form to acknowledge that they were true. And I think it has something to do, quite frankly, I hope this is okay to say, but with Trump's presidency and the question of what a fact is, and if such a thing as a fact exists. And I was interested in working in the realm of fact. So I didn't want to call them prose poems because with a poem, even if I read you a poem and it was about a woman from Mississippi with 3 kids and you would think it was about me, you couldn't say it was about me. We'd have to say the speaker in this poem, you know, and play this game with each other. And I just wanted to take away that mask. And so in the pieces, you know, I'm addressed as from other people as Beth Ann, and you know, the I is me. And in fact, before I published the book, I shared it with all the people I wrote about. To make sure everyone could fact check it and everyone was okay with it. So it felt different from poetry in that way too. Maybe I'll let Rana talk now. Yeah.
I really identify with that. I think for me, I basically what I did with my first book is just take my diary that I wrote from the age of 10 to the age of 35, which was thousands and thousands of pages. And then I sat with it one entire summer, like 3 months, and edited. Before that, I worked as an editor mostly at Yediot Books, as the editor of Hebrew literature. So basically, I did an editor's job on it. So I wanted to create a growing up story that will not have so many gaps in it, but at the same time, I couldn't put the entire 25 years of writing, of course. So just to take excerpts, or how do you say that word, and to make it feel like it's continuing, even though there's sometimes gaps of years between each part. And also, I thought I would take the rules of reality TV, which was just new back then, and I wouldn't change anything that I wrote, like I wouldn't make my writing better than how I originally wrote it, but I would allow myself to mess with the order of delivery. So I could take something that I wrote when I was 20-something and then put it as if I wrote it when I was 17 and just create, and also I could mess with like the boyfriends, you know, like take something from one boyfriend and put it in another boyfriend and just, you know, I allowed myself all these little untruths. But I didn't touch the truth of what I was really feeling or how I was really expressing myself. If it came out not that beautiful, then that's just how it was. And to keep it feeling like a real person's diary. And also I thought that in auto-reality, I think the reason I had this idea was because I was approached many times to come and take part in a real reality television. But I hated the idea of having my life, basically, being then manipulated and edited by somebody else. And I thought, if at all, I would like to manipulate my own life by myself. And these are my experiences. Let me play with them and see what I can do to have tension or to tell a story, but using my own, which basically you could just say it was documentary, but you know, I don't know why I felt the need to call it auto-reality. And the other thing is that I always felt that as a young woman in Israel, my voice doesn't count. Nobody cares. You know, if you're not a general in the army, who cares what you think about something? At least that was true when this book came out. I don't know, maybe things are better right now, but one of the critics, like one of the main critiques was, I loved the book, but who is she? Why would she write a book about herself? I mean, she's not, was she in any war? Is she Anna Frank? Did she go through the Holocaust? What makes it legitimate for her to the title was, is she Anna Frank? You know? So why would this woman, young woman, write her own, I was young back then, why would she write her own, publish her own diary if she didn't go through something very traumatic? And I just wanted to show what growing up in Israel was for a young woman who is almost anonymous.
Thank you. Those are spectacular answers, both of you. And I hope everybody here, for those of you who are writing now or thinking about writing, that you listen to those answers, because there's something very liberating about what these two people just told you, which is you don't have to adhere to something that's already been done. You can stake your own claim and say, I'm going to try this, or I'm going to go in this path. It's really, you're inspiring me to go do something, the anti-novel. I don't know what it's going to be. So Rana, you just touched on something that has to do with topic, like what people write about and why they write about these things. And, you know, for generations, the men wrote the novels that people read, and it was assumed, and there was criticism about women writing, that what were they going to write about? They were going to write about family, and they were going to write about things, you know, close in their world, and who would want to read about that? And of course, everything is turned around as far as that goes. And I can't help noticing that both of you, family figures quite prominently in your writing, and of course it's fascinating. I don't know what could be more fascinating than the daily machinations that we all go through, and then somebody making sense of those things for us. So can you tell us about how you choose what you're going to write about? I know that in your first book you were, well, there's still choice. As a diarist, there's still lots of choice. So in either of your books, how you come to write what you're writing?
So basically in the first book, I had so many subjects, right? It was my real diary. Obviously, I also wrote about work and about my studies when I went to university and about many things. But I decided to not put any of that into the book. Maybe I was influenced subconsciously by what you said, thinking that a woman should only write about family. Maybe. I didn't think about it. But I did decide to braid this book out of the three parts of the braid that are family, love life, and war. So war as it influenced me, not war as I went to fight a war. I was not hardly in the army. So at first I wanted to even call it Life in the Shadow of War, but there came a movie with this title exactly on the same year, so I couldn't use it. Yeah. So in the first book, yes, it's a growing up novel, not a novel, but whatever, but it's a growing up story. So family, love, and war was for me growing up. But the second book, which I'll talk about later, is about psychedelic experiences, so no longer about family.
Could I ask Rana a question? Yeah. So at what point when you were keeping your diaries did you know that you'd be using them for another reason? Was it only that summer?
Yeah. I betrayed myself completely and couldn't write a diary after that for like 3 years.
Yeah. I'm not surprised only because if you knew you were going to write it later, I would guess it would make you self-conscious and change the quality of the work.
Nobody will ever see it, and I will burn everything before I die or something, but then I cheated and betrayed myself.
Well, we're glad you did.
Did you want to say anything about the topic, about what your topics are?
Oh.
You come to them?
Well, it is true when I was growing up that, I was taught to read Ulysses and understand the great topic was a man going off to war and, everything that would follow and the Greek myths, all that stuff. And, I tried to be interested in that and I just never really was. And I ended up turning my gaze in another direction and finding the little tiny fraught moments of our life that reveal so much when you look at them with the right attention and almost dignifying the small moments, maybe particularly of a woman's life, dignifying them with the attention of the gaze.
So in both of the readings that you gave, you were talking about serious things, but there was a lot of humor. And I think that humor is one of the hardest things to do well, and you both were doing it well. Could you say something about writing funny, how it works, how it comes out of you when you know you're being funny and maybe when you're not being so funny and what you do about that?
Yeah, I wasn't at all funny when I was younger. I've always liked to be around funny people. I like to laugh, but I never thought of myself as someone funny. And I think as I got older, I got funnier. And I think it became just a little bit growing older and getting more confident in my voice. And not, because part of understanding what's funny is not stopping to question, is this funny to other people? But just, enjoying that it's absurd to you. And that was going hand in hand with really finding what my own voice was, what I was interested in, was less about thinking, is this interesting to someone else? Should I stop writing this? Is this stupid? Am I stupid? And just writing it because I liked it. And I began to think, if I'm having fun, I don't care what anyone else thinks. If I'm having fun, just go with the fun. And so part of that was liberating in just the respect that I stopped really writing for other people and started just entertaining myself. And the nice blessing about that is, you stop turning your focus towards things like, will this be published or will so-and-so like it? If your goal is just to be enjoying yourself and finding yourself like deep in the process of like mashing words up together, you can free yourself a little bit from that idea of success coming externally and find the success of, if I'm writing, I'm winning.
I think I was exactly the opposite. I think I was really funny when I was younger, and the older I get, I just lost it completely. It's. I think because I'm not angrier now. No, I was actually angrier when I was younger, but I think I became more philosophical as I grew up, and also I did my turn into philosophy and just dried up my humor.
I think that's a new genre for you, funny philosophy. I think you should think about that a little bit. Rana, you are a translator as well as a writer, and I am a translator, and some of the students here are studying translation and becoming translators as well. Could you give us a little window into your world as a translator? What you do, how you do it, what you enjoy about it, maybe even what you don't enjoy about it.
Well, when you translate a book that you love, that's the greatest joy ever. But many books disintegrate as you translate them, and you thought you liked the book very much when you first read it, and then you start working at it, and then you think it's just a piece of, it's just not good, and it falls apart somehow, and then you have to work extra just to make it work. Sometimes I even like that, but sometimes I just hate myself for taking this book, and also I think most translation work these days in Israel, because of our market and the way that it's really, falling, is of extremely popular books, where it's just, you could Google Translate and then just edit, because the language is so simple that, I'm sure with my first book you could do the same. Just Google Translate. Google Translation is now so good. It's just getting better all the time, and just edit a little spot and it would work. But the fun in translation is invention, right? It's like thinking of how to say these expressions in Hebrew, or how to keep the humor, or how to find the right level of, like in Hebrew many times, like in old age, but still to this day, every translator tends to translate into a higher language, like into literary Hebrew. There is no such thing, but there is such a thing, literary Hebrew, and disregard the original English or language in which the book was written, and always make it higher. I don't know how to say mishlav in English. Register, okay. Always in a higher register. So that's also one of the games that are nice to play when you translate, but I think lately, and that's why I stopped translating for now, except for, picking like every once in a while, because all the books are in the same register all the time, and there are hardly any challenges anymore. And so this is our scene right now, except for some tiny publishing houses that still do great work, and you should seek them out. Anyway, there's no money in it, so, just do what you love. And
Yeah, we're always battling that issue. Beth Ann, you are the Poet Laureate of Mississippi. And I have to say, when I see that phrase, I picture you on a pedestal draped in Spanish moss. What is the Poet Laureate of Mississippi, and what does it mean you have to do, really?
Well, basically, I sit on a pedestal draped in Spanish moss. Thank you, Evan, for nailing that. Yeah. It's a public service position, no money. And so basically, it's very expensive. Kidding. But I do spend a lot of time going to schools, and particularly, I think that kids are taught to hate poetry, but I think all children love poetry. I think that, making up sounds on the playground, and just feeling words in your mouth and just liking the way they sound, that's poetry. That's pleasure. And we lose that at our peril, and it happens sometimes, I think, in high school, and so I'm just trying to get poetry back into the ears of children when they know that they love it and they're not scared of it, and hopefully keep them loving it later, because I do think that poetry and that attention to language and to our souls can improve our lives. So I do end up finding I enjoy that work, even though I don't get paid.
It's very nice. And I have a question about the the novel that you co-authored with your husband. And I love that. The novel that she co-authored with her husband. There's so many things to unpack in that sentence. So first of all, I've never understood how two people can write a novel together, so I'd like you to say something about that. And he's still your husband. I was actually a little afraid. I wanted to make sure about that before I got her on stage and asked her a question about that, because it would be a little bit awkward, because I don't see how that works. You know, maybe the co-authoring part, but managing to stay together after that, that's pretty inspiring.
Well, it was fun, actually. We were lucky we hit on a subject matter that was of interest to both of us. And now sometimes people ask us if we'll write another one. Even though it was so fun, I think that was a one-time thing. I can't really imagine, because we wrote about a natural disaster that happened in the state of Mississippi in 1927 when the Mississippi River flooded its banks. And so there was a lot of destruction and violence around that time, and frankly, my husband is really interested in destruction and violence. He's a very gentle soul, but he comes to it from that world. And but we had a female point of view character who was a new mom, and I was writing that I had a 3-month-old baby, and when we started, so the baby was 3 months in the novel, and I was writing with one hand, and so I got to write a lot about the things I was interested in as well. And we learned a lot about each other from writing the novel, and we'd been married many, many years before we started it. So I guess I would have thought there wouldn't be so many discoveries, but we did learn a lot about each other. And at the end of it, we were actually composing aloud, sentence by sentence, and that was really fun. It was a different kind of writing. I've never done anything like that before, and it felt really intimate, and it felt really freeing.
So you were building the plot as you went along? Okay, so you were discovering it together as you went along, and then you got to a certain point where you were together and then creating it. Oh, that's amazing. That's the braided novel, I think. That's really extraordinary. I'm going to ask you each to read a little bit again. So Rana, will you go first this time?
So this time I'll read from the new translation to the new book, which came out 2 years ago, and Joanna Chen translated it this time. And in the second book, so I wanted to do something else with the genre, but I still wanted to talk about my own experiences, and this time with the psychedelic experiences that I've had in the 10 years that passed then between the first and second book. But I decided, because of the subject, I was really afraid. It wasn't, even just 3 or 4 years ago, it wasn't the same as it is today. We're like in this psychedelic renaissance, and there are articles every day in the newspaper, and back then I was afraid of the police, so I decided that I will put in characters. But the characters are really aspects of myself. But they also just developed into their own. They now have characteristics that are not really mine. So they have my experiences, but they're not exactly me, and they have other names, families, love lives, gender, and netiot miniyot, I don't know how to say it, sexual orientations. So they're different than me in many ways. But we do share the same life experiences somehow. And there's also the character of me, the narrator, in between the stories of the 4 women. But basically it's like a continuance of the first book, the next 10 years. So Nora is the first character, a story, and okay, and I'll just read. But it starts with a T.S. Eliot short motto. Would it have been worthwhile to have bitten off the matter with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a ball, to roll it toward some overwhelming question? T.S. Eliot. Nora is walking down King George Street, carrying shopping bags heavy with frozen, canned, and fresh food. She's listening to music on her headphones while studying the passerby. Who shall be remembered and who shall be forgotten? Who shall reproduce and who go extinct? Who shall partake in the planning of the bridge which the powers of wisdom have been constructing for thousands of years, in a timeless joint effort to cross the puddle of death? And who shall be fated to be nothing more than raw substance, just another laboring, breeding ant in the wall? We're actually all raw substance, Nora thinks. Her palms are red, grooved with lines, aching from the weight of her bags. No one will cross the puddle alive, not in our generation. Nora arrives in her building, flicks on the light, and carries the groceries up 3 flights of stairs. At home, she empties the bags and puts everything away in the fridge and the cupboards, disgusted with herself, with the quantities of food and drinks she has to consume all the time. No matter how much she buys, not a week goes by before she has to go shopping again. During the roughest patch in their relationship, when Ben was insisting it was time she got pregnant, joining forces with her mother, and when the pressure to procreate, toe the pheromone line, and devote her life to the rearing of the next generation was becoming truly unbearable, Nora set off for a weekend up north with a friend from the philosophy department. There, in a remote virginal forest clearing, with a group of white-clad people sitting around a fire singing foreign prayers accompanied by guitars and drums, she took 2 sips of a revolting Brazilian herbal potion. It was nauseating to the point of vomiting, and vomit she did, twice. It took an hour for the ayahuasca to kick in. Nora was lying on the mattress, gazing up at the treetops and listening to the music. The shaman was singing a monotonous song, repeating the word medicine over and over. Medicine, medicine, medicine. Suddenly, Nora felt that a laser beam had been moving across her entire body and scanning it, starting at the soles of her feet. It was already up to her knees. Nora followed the beam's progress with some trepidation. It radiated more intensely over certain areas. Nora noticed this when the beam lingered on the right side of her stomach, where she often experienced pain. Interesting. When it paused above her left breast, Nora became a little worried. But rather than overwhelming her, the worry quickly went away and she could focus again until the examination was over. It ended successfully around her throat and the beam went out. The flora lit up in brilliant, colorful lights. A dazzling blossom festooned the treetops. The night blazed overhead. A phenomenal mating dance. At first it worked on Nora the way Did It Hurt When You Fell from the Heaven pickup lines worked on 12-year-old girls in the 50s. She was throbbing with wonder and awe, until all at once it dawned on her that nature was trying to stymie, I don't know how to say this word, her awareness, to coax her into unconsciousness, as if the earth, the trees, the plants, the entire universe were no longer willing to wait for her like it did for everything else, to disintegrate into particles like everything else and give herself over, all her energy, to the greater good. Nora was instantly overwhelmed with fierce resistance. This brew is witchcraft. She shook before the panoply of burning flowers. I have decades to live still, hopefully. I'm not ready to become fertilizer. But everything worked to make her want to merge with everything, to dispense the energy her body stored. The trees became Don Juans who ate girls like her for breakfast. A capillary web of sparkles shimmered amongst thousands of pink, purple, and orange flowers, a glimmering lattice work that stretched between the tree branches and across the sky. Countless stars shone beyond, in all their faraway meanings, and the tree towering above her extended a branch heavy with blossom. A cunning leaf elf, who was crouched on it, gave her a mischievous wink. Dizzied with awe, Nora marveled at the stunning nature around her. Though it sounded ridiculous, she now understood what it was offering, to inseminate her with its seed. She agreed, with a vigorous nod, head downright bobbing with ecstasy. She went for it, exclaiming with all the dramatics of a telenovela, "Yes, nature, take me, I want it." The blossoming branch above her burst through the tiny shimmering capillary web, sprouted a sharpened finger that inched towards her and penetrated her through her navel. Nora lay on a mattress in the middle of the forest, pulled off the blankets that covered her, and felt she was bursting with desire. The warmth in her loins pervaded her entire body. burning heat blooming everywhere, so that she had no need to divaricate in order to be penetrated, for it happened in an instant from her belly to the rest of her body. With her consent, the tree inseminated her in some non-earthly but entirely palpable manner, not only in her body but beyond it. All of nature participated in this frenzied celebration. At the peak of her pleasure and ecstasy, a blinding white light erupted from Nora's stomach, shining like a split atom, and Nora felt that she was giving birth to energy, a naval birth, which felt like a prolonged, powerful orgasm. She gave herself entirely, blinded by passion, dazzled by the bright light that gushed out from every pore, trembling, sweating, panting. After 3 such rounds of charging and discharging, she lay exhausted and half unconscious on the mattress, lifted a feeble arm and touched the soil next to her head. It was cold. She heard the people in the circle wailing, howling, moaning, purgatory. Nora didn't dare fully open her eyes, just halfway, to make sure no one was coming too close. They had probably observed her, and it must have looked... Never mind. Nora closed her eyes. She was cold. The pleasure had faded and left her feeling used, drained, depleted, exploited. But I don't believe in such religious views of sexuality, Nora mumbled to herself, curling into a fetal position on the mattress and trying to fend off the paranoia and wretchedness that were closing in on her. Where did these thoughts come from, she asked herself. Why do I feel so humiliated? I don't even believe in leaf elves or enchanted trees. A candle flickered before her in the image of a smiling monk. She smiled back at him. He pressed his palms together and took a bow. She felt that he was watching over her. He might as well, she thought, and thanked him. But I don't believe in abstinence or asceticism. Nora, now completely relaxed and lucid, could remind herself. No, I believe in healthy sexuality. And what could be healthier than having sex with nature? Exactly. Thank you very much. And now I'll return to my tent, sit in my sleeping bag, and process it all. If I stay here, nature will continue to shine light through me until I'm pulverized into fertilizer. I won't allow it. I'm an educated woman who believes in the intellect, in reason, in modern science. I come from a family of doctors. I'm not one to fall for superstitions. I'm just tripping, that's all. I should take care of myself, and that's it. But, she thought, in the end, we all break down into fertilizer. So, what's paranoid about it? Okay, I won't continue because it's too long, but have the thanks.
Students, do not try this at home. Beth Ann.
Thank you. I'll read 4 pieces. 3 of them are for my project I'm working on now, and one of them is an old poem. 2 sisters, one thinner, one better dressed. When my sister and I would meet at her apartment before heading out to the bars, I would choose my clothes with care. I knew that when I walked through her door, she would study me, especially if a few weeks or more had passed since we'd seen each other. Sisters are envious, sure. But we were also information gathering. We looked a bit alike, so it was a way to test how we'd fare in a different outfit, haircut. She was often thinner than I was, but I had better style. Younger by 2 years, I was her leader only in fashion. I would often be wearing something she hadn't yet considered. She would ask me where I got it, and I would tell her, maybe showing off a little. Sometimes she'd want to try it on, and I would accessorize her, cuff her jeans, or angle the belt correctly on her hips. If she asked, we'd swap outfits for the night. It was worth being the frumpier one to make her happy. I'm still aware of how I look when I visit her. I live in a different state now, so it's not as often. But when I'm back in Chicago at our mom's house, I always end my run by visiting her. I stand panting in the grass at my sister's feet. I'm aware of how she sees me, huffing clouds from my lungs, my legs strong, my skin bright with sweat in my new running clothes. Still showing off, I suppose, as she's stuck wearing the navy suit I chose the last time I styled her. A suit now 13 years outdated, though fashionable enough when they closed the casket. I wrote this next one because I have a friend who's estranged from her sister, and sometimes she tells me how many years it's been since she's talked to her sister on the phone, and my sister's dead, and I just think, how could you have a sister alive that you don't talk to? How could you let this time go by? And my sister's been dead so long now, it made me think, what if she was alive? Maybe we wouldn't like each other. Maybe we wouldn't even be friends. And why am I always thinking, how could this other woman not talk to her sister every time she has a chance? So I wrote this: but you can't pick your family. Maybe if you were still alive, we wouldn't even be close. Maybe we wouldn't even be friends. Maybe I would see your name on my phone, you who died before phones displayed names, and groan, roll my eyes at my husband who would murmur sympathetically, "You have to talk to her sometime." Maybe we'd live on different coasts. Maybe that wouldn't feel far enough. Maybe we'd dread Thanksgiving, suffer through it, promising ourselves 364 days before I have to see her again. Maybe hungover the next morning on the toilet, dribbling saffron-colored pee, I think stupidly about the joke about how you can pick your nose, but you can't pick your family. Maybe your death is what perfected you, providing a locus for my Weltschmerz, my longing, my lack, my loneliness, my cherished belief that I've been robbed of my boon companion. Maybe your death is my boon. Maybe it's freed me to craft the perfect voodoo doll, a doll I pose according to my needs. Maybe every poem I write about missing you becomes, after I pin it through your doll heart, another petticoat. There's so much I never thanked you for. So I'm going to switch tones a little bit from that kind of dark note. But one of the fun things about writing these short pieces is that you can do a lot of tones, a lot of different moods, and you can kind of switch through them kind of fast. But I decided to read this one because I knew that there would be a lot of writers and translators and readers and scholars here tonight. And I was thinking about what it's like when you have a job that doesn't look very hard to other people. And I was thinking about this in particular because, well, I read that poem I wrote about my father-in-law who was a mechanic, and Tommy's other brother, his other son is a mechanic, and the brother-in-law's a mechanic, and the nephews are mechanics, and so I'd be down there for the holidays, and they'd come home from work and they'd be like dirty and bloody, and they'd like bruised fingernails, and they would talk about how hard their day was, and sometimes I would have graded papers all day or read all day, and I also wanted to contribute, and they'd be like, "Ooh, that transmission," and I'd want to be like, "Ooh, that chapter on Dickinson," but you can't say that, you just look like such a fool, so I wrote this. It is hard when your job is hard, but does not appear to be so. For instance, when the lawn care crew arrives, and you are reading. You are aware of how this looks. You are aware that if they glance through the window, they will see a woman in her pajamas reclining in an easy chair, reading. They cradle heavy leaf blowers, wear goggles and earplugs. Your slippered feet are propped on an ottoman. They are well within their rights to think, look at that idle woman. But in fact, your reading is far from easy, though you read in an easy chair. Sometimes, in order to keep from quitting, you must bully or cajole yourself. You are fatigued from this reading, though it doesn't show, so you get no credit for your stamina. If only when reading difficult material, your face grew red and sweaty. If only your breathing grew ragged and labored, like during great exertion at the gym, deadlift and chest press, hammer curl and lat raise, and now the hardest exercise of all, lick finger to turn page. You can do it, Beth Ann. 2 more sets of 8 reps. And this is the last piece I'll write, and I'll thank you all for listening so kindly tonight. Last piece I'll read, and this is an excerpt from a poem, a longer poem. I'm just going to read you part of it. It's kind of like an Ars Poetica, but again, I decided I wanted to read this tonight because Marcella said that there'd be a lot of people here who are writers, and this is kind of as close as I've ever come to expressing, I think, my philosophy on writing. The next time a student asks how to become a writer, I will say, sit in a white room without paper and think of the poacher who shot the wing off the bald eagle, who must have seen he wrecked his trophy and, disgusted, thrashed off deeper into the forest wearing his expensive forest-colored clothes. Then, think of the man from the wild bird sanctuary who found the eagle, sutured its ragged wing stub, fed the awkward hopping thing for years, and, before it died, took it to a mountain and harnessed it in a hang glider, so one last time its hollow bones could float, so one last time its talons could tear the gauzy cloak of sky, so one last time its eyes could scour the forest floor from hunter's height, flying in the face of God that one last time. Think of the poacher, think of the birder, alternate, shortening the intervals. When you can hold both of these men in the palm of your mind at the same time, love, come find me and teach me.
Thank you both. 2 wonderful, wonderful readings. We don't have a lot of time left, but if somebody would like to ask a question, something burning.
Sure. So the question is, what types of things we learned about each other, my husband and I, when we wrote the novel we wrote together. Well, one thing that we already knew but was really clear to us is that we have really different working methods, because I'm a kind of type A personality and I want to go like straight on something, and he wants to kind of procrastinate. And in fact, the reason the novel took so long, one reason is because we had these 2 point of view characters, a female and a male. So we had this idea that I would write a chapter from the female point of view and he would write a chapter from the male point of view, and we would email it back and forth and it'd be done in a year. And that never happened. And then he was out on book tour, and I opened up one of his chapters, and I started like mucking about. I know it was so bad. I didn't mean to. I was just going to give him like a couple little thoughts or notes, and then all of a sudden I was writing from his point of view character. But that weirdly, that's when the novel came alive to me, because before then I always felt like I better not cross this line. And then we started mucking about in each other's stuff, and that's when it really got fun. I did say we learned a lot. Suddenly, I can't think of anything we learned about each other, except I guess I learned I love him even more. Is that okay? Sounds cheesy. Maybe I haven't seen him in a couple of days and he's home with our kids. But it was really fun.
That's great. Thanks for the question.
How does it compare, my connection? Right. Well, I don't know if that's because of the genre or because of using characters, but I feel totally disconnected from my first book, even though it's my own diary, okay? But through working on it, I really connected myself from myself so that I can work on it like an editor and do things that I needed to do and not think that it was me, okay? Because the editing job was really hard on this and took a long time to, go through thousands of pages and find little bits. And so I disconnected myself so much that I'm still disconnected. And with the second book, I think because in a weird way, I feel more connected to characters that are no longer me at all, have different tastes and, but maybe because it's recent, maybe in 8 years I'm going to feel totally disconnected from this book as well, but right now I feel like this is more, but also in a weird way, or not weird at all, on the way here, I picked what to read from the first book, and I started reading it after years that I never opened it. And I thought, it's not bad. There are some parts that are fine. And then I found a whole part about my ayahuasca experience that I didn't remember I had in my first book at all. And then I started comparing between, I wrote about the same experience again in the second book, only now it was totally different. Not totally different. Some things were still the same, but so many things were actually told really differently in the real diary, and that's what happens with memories, right? I mean, you remember the things differently when 10 years pass, you just have a different story. And also I teach. In the past 2 years I've been teaching, and that's one thing I tell all of my students, we're just fabricating, we're just inventing life. That's what our brain does. It tells stories about everything, about reality. Nothing is true, so who cares if something really happened or didn't really happen? I mean, students should care, but, So you can, honestly, I feel more connected to some of the books that I've read.
I wish we could carry on, but we're going to bring this to an end, and I want to thank you both again. And I want to remind all of you that the conference goes on for the next 2 days. So tomorrow we have a translation workshop at 10. We have a panel, how we got where we are now, starting, revising, publishing strategies and stories. We have a hybrid literature workshop at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's you. Yeah. That's you. 5 o'clock, we're going to be doing the prizes for poetry, fiction, nonfiction, and literary translation with a musical performance and more refreshments at 6:15. And then the final event of the day will be Ariella Friedman reading and in conversation with Ilana Blumberg. So you can meet these people again tomorrow in different guises and doing different things. And thank you again, all of you, for coming, and especially to the two of you. Thank you so much.
So much.